Hello, welcome to lesson 10.4B. I've entitled this video, In Money We Trust. This video is going to cover pages 624 to 629. What led to the rise of corporations and banks? Before the railroad boom, nearly every American town had its own small factories. They produced goods for people in the area. By the late 1800s, however, big factories were producing goods more cheaply than small factories could. Railroads distributed these goods to markets all over the country. As demand for local goods fell, many small factories closed. Big factories then increased their output. Question number 1. Why did many small factories close because of the growth of the railroads? Well, the railroads could distribute the goods all over the country, so the smaller factories couldn't keep up with the bigger factories and the amount they were able to produce. So the growth of the railroads actually led to the growth of bigger factories and the death of a lot of smaller mom and pop shops, if you will. So question 2, how did the big factories benefit from the growth of the railroads? Well, they could produce a lot of goods and then ship them through the railroad system that America had. By increasing output, big factories were able to earn greater revenue, or income earned from a business after covering costs. Factories often used revenue to expand operations or buy out rivals. Revenues allowed them to grow. So question number 2 as well, how did big factories benefit from the growth of the railroads? They also were able to increase their revenue. Number 3, revenue is income earned from business after they pay for things they need to pay for, like rent, electricity, things like that. Number 4, what did the big factories spend some of their revenue on? They used some of their revenue to expand their operations, to grow their enterprise, and sometimes they used the money to buy out their rivals. It allowed them to grow. Companies using revenues to expand increased their capital. Capital is money used to invest in the long-term health and success of a company. Number 5, capital. Capital is money used to invest in the long-term health and success of a company. So it's an investment. They take the money and they reinvest it into their company so that their company can make even more money in the future. Number 6, how did some companies gain capital for investment? Well, they did that on this slide. However, sometimes companies borrowed money for capital investment. Other companies gave investors stock or partial ownership of the company in return for capital. Companies might use this capital to build factories, buy new equipment, or buy out other companies. To raise capital and invest in future growth, Americans adopted new ways of organizing their businesses. They created corporations. Question number 6. How did some companies gain capital for investment? They issued what are called stock or shares of stock. Number 7, what is stock? Stock is partial ownership of a company. In return, the company gets capital and the person gets partial ownership in the company. Question 8. Why did some companies issue stock to investors? Well, they wanted a way to borrow money for capital investment. So one way to do that is to borrow it from people who then get partial ownership in the company. They want the company to do well, so the stock prices go up and they can make even more money. Number 9, what were 3 things that companies spent their capital on? They spent it on building factories, buying new equipment, and buying out other companies. Businesses become corporations. A corporation is a business that is owned by investors. Laws and court rulings allow corporations to enjoy many of the rights of individuals. Number 10, what is a corporation? A corporation is a business that is owned by investors. So it's a business that has stock in it. Investors in stock, or stockholders, hope to receive dividends or shares of a corporation's profits. Stockholders elect a board of directors to run the corporation. So for question number 11, what is a stockholder? That is a person who invests in the stock market. Question number 12, what is a dividend? A dividend, like this picture shown here, is a part of the profits that a corporation makes. The dividend is what they pay the people that purchase the stock. It's a way of saying thank you, but instead of just a pat on the back and a thumbs up, it's actually money that the stockholder can use in their own lives. Owners of stock in a corporation face fewer risks than owners of private businesses do. If a private business goes bankrupt, the owner must pay all the debts of the business. By law, stockholders cannot be held responsible for a corporation's debts. So for question 13, why do stockholders of a corporation face fewer risks than owners of a private business? Well, if the private business goes bankrupt, the owner must pay all the debts back. If you are a stockholder, You do not have to worry about the corporation's debts if they do go bankrupt or owe a lot of money. It may hurt the price of the stock that you own, but you're not going to be held responsible for that debt. And we'll talk more about the stock market next year in 8th grade. I'm actually going to have a stock market game where you will be in a team trying to purchase stocks and make a lot of money in competition with the other teams. So we're going to focus more on the stock market next year as 8th graders. Corporations and banks. In the years after the Civil War, corporations attracted large amounts of capital from American investors. Corporations also borrowed millions of dollars from banks. Some of this money came from national banks backed by the federal government, and some came from the state banks. Loans helped American industry grow at a rapid pace. At the same time, bankers made huge profits. So question 14, how did the banks benefit from the growth of corporations? Well, corporations, in order to grow, needed to take out loans, and so where do they go to get the loans? They went to the banks, and who do they pay the loans back? They paid with the money they made as a successful corporation, so the banks were making money on money. That's how banks make money. They let people borrow money, and then they have to pay it back plus interest. So banks make money on the money they let people borrow. The most powerful banker of the late 1800s was J. Pierpont Morgan, also known as J.P. Morgan. Morgan's influence was not limited to banking. He used his banking profits to gain control of major corporations. During economic hard times in the 1890s, Morgan and other bankers bought up troubled corporations. They then adopted policies that reduced competition and ensured big profits. "I like a little competition, but I like combination more," Morgan used to say. Question 15, who was the most powerful banker of the late 1800s? J.P. Morgan. Question 16, although Morgan was known for being a banker, what did he also do with his banking profits? He bought control of major corporations. He spread his influence not just in banking, but in other areas of life, in other corporations. Question 17, what did Morgan mean when he said, "I like a little competition, but I like combination more"? What he was saying is he would rather combine corporations to make one large corporation to make more money than having to compete in lower prices with other competition. Morgan gained control of several major rail lines. He then began to buy up steel companies, including Carnegie Steel, and to merge them into a single large corporation. By 1901, Morgan had become head of the United States Steel Company. It was the first American business worth more than $1 billion. Question 18, how did J.P. Morgan create the first American business worth more than $1 billion? He was able to do that by combining corporations into one large corporation known as United States or U.S. Steel Corporation. How did Rockefeller take control of the oil industry? Industry could not have expanded so quickly in the United States without the nation's rich supply of natural resources. Iron ore was plentiful, especially in the Mississippi Range of Minnesota. Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and the Rocky Mountains had large deposits of coal. The Rockies also contained minerals such as gold, silver, and copper. Vast forests provided lumber for building. So question 19, what helped American industry expand so quickly? The natural resources that the United States had. Number 20, what were some of those valuable natural resources that we had? We had lots of iron ore, we had gold, coal, silver, oil, copper, and lumber. In 1859, Americans discovered a valuable new resource, oil. Drillers near Titusville, Pennsylvania made the nation's first oil strike. An oil boom quickly followed. Hundreds of prospectors rushed to western Pennsylvania ready to drill wells in search of black gold or oil. 21. What valuable resource was discovered in Titusville, Pennsylvania in 1859? Oil. The Standard Oil Empire. Among those who came to the Pennsylvania oil fields was young John D. Rockefeller. Rockefeller, however, did not rush to drill for oil. He knew that oil had little value until it was refined or purified to make kerosene. Kerosene was used as a fuel in stoves and lamps. So, Rockefeller built an oil refinery. Question 22. Why did Rockefeller invest in an oil refinery rather than an oil well? Well, he knew that the oil had little value unless it became refined. So he knew the money was in the refining of the oil to make it into valuable kerosene. Now, eventually, the oil would become valuable for gasoline that we would use in automobiles, but that would come after the invention of the automobile. Rockefeller believed that competition was wasteful. He used the profits from his refinery to buy up other refineries. He then combined the companies into the Standard Oil Company of Ohio. Rockefeller was a shrewd businessman. He was always trying to improve the quality of his oil. He also did whatever he could to rid his competition. Standard Oil slashed its prices to drive rivals out of business. It pressured its customers not to deal with other oil companies. It forced railroad companies eager for its business to grant rebates to Standard Oil. Lower shipping costs gave Rockefeller an important advantage over his competitors. So question 23, what did Rockefeller think about competition? He did not like competition. He felt it was wasteful. 24, what did Rockefeller do with his refinery profits? He used them to buy up other refineries. In other words, to buy up his competition. 25, what shrewd tactics did Rockefeller use to become the wealthiest American in history? Yes, Rockefeller is the wealthiest American that has ever lived. What he did with his money? Well, he bought out his competition, and he would do that by he would slash his prices, which drove the prices so low that his rivals couldn't compete. He would pressure customers not to deal with other companies. He would force railroad companies only to do business with him by giving him rebates, so he was able to ship his things lower, which gave him an important advantage over his competition. The success of Rockefeller's empire reflects the economic law of demand, the law of supply and demand. By lowering the price of oil, Rockefeller was able to attract more buyers. By providing enough oil to meet that demand, he could also increase total sales. Rockefeller's success would not have been possible without the rise of national markets. Railroads could distribute products nationally, not just locally. National corporations marketed products widely, and railroads delivered them to consumers across the country. So question 26, how did Rockefeller's success demonstrate the economic law of supply and demand? Well, Rockefeller lowered his prices of the oil, which meant that more people wanted his oil. So he improved or increased the demand for his oil by making it at a price that people would want to demand or want it at. And then once he found that price point, he then sold a lot of that oil. So he increased his sales even at a cheaper price. He still made more money than if the oil would have been too expensive and the average person could not have bought it. That is the law of supply and demand. Question 27. How was Rockefeller's success helped by the rise of national markets? It was helped by the railroads. The railroads were able to distribute the products nationally, not just locally. So Rockefeller was able to make a bunch of money from across the country, not just in his local area. The oil monopoly. To tighten his hold over the oil industry, Rockefeller formed the Standard Oil Trust in 1882. A trust is a group of corporations run by a single board of directors. Stockholders in dozens of smaller oil companies turned over their stock to Standard Oil. In return, they got stock in the newly created trust. The trust paid the stockholders high dividends. However, the board of Standard Oil, headed by Rockefeller, managed all the companies which had previously been rivals. The Standard Oil Trust created a monopoly of the oil industry. A monopoly controls all or nearly all the business of an industry. The Standard Oil Trust controlled 95% of all oil refining in the United States. Other businesses followed Rockefeller's lead. They set up trusts and tried to build monopolies. By the 1890s, monopolies and trusts controlled some of the nation's most important industries. Question 28. What is a trust? A trust is a group of corporations run by a single board of directors. Question 29. How did Rockefeller's trust work? Well, there were a bunch of smaller oil companies. They turned over their stock to Standard Oil. In return, they got stock in the new trust, the Standard Oil Trust. Then the trust paid them a lot of money in dividends, so they were happy. But then now Rockefeller has most of the oil companies in the United States. In fact, by the end, he had 95% of all the oil refining in the United States. So it was win-win for Rockefeller. He gave his competition stock. They were happy. They were making lots of money. But in return, he had basically eliminated almost all of his competition. Question 30. A monopoly is when a business is controlled by all or nearly all of a business or one person. So monopoly is when someone or some business has all or nearly all of the business in that particular industry. For example, fast food, there's McDonald's, there's Burger King, there's Wendy's, there's a lot of those. But if there was only McDonald's and you could only go to McDonald's and there was nothing else to eat in the United States fast food industry, that would be a monopoly. Americans debate over trust. Some Americans charged that the leaders of giant corporations were abusing capitalism. Under capitalism, Businesses are owned by private citizens. Owners decide what products to make, how much to produce, where to sell products, and what prices to charge. Companies compete in a free market to win customers by making the best product at the lowest price. So question 31. By the 1890s, how were monopolies and trusts affecting the United States? Well, they were spreading all throughout the industries. It wasn't just the oil industry. It was spreading into all the businesses of the United States. 32. What complaint did some people have about the leaders of these giant corporations? Well, that they were abusing capitalism, that they were not doing what was supposed to be done in the free enterprise system. They were squeezing out competition, which is a part of capitalism. 33. Speaking of capitalism, what are some of the principles and ideas behind capitalism? Well, businesses are owned by private citizens, not by the government. Owners decide what to make. Owners decide how much to produce. Owners decide where to sell their products. And owners decide what prices to charge. And then companies compete in a free market to win customers by making the best product at the cheapest or lowest price that the consumers are willing to spend their money on. All people in a free market system have to make choices about what products to buy. This is because there is a limited supply of resources, a principle known as scarcity. Companies compete for scarce resources and for customers. Customers then make choices about what to buy to meet their needs, keeping in mind their scarce income or savings. People have fewer options when there are fewer companies competing. So question 34, what choice do people have in a free market system? Well, they have choices about what they're going to buy and what they're willing to spend on certain things. 35, what is scarcity? Scarcity is the concept that there is a limited supply of resources on our planet. There's only so much of things that we as humans want. We always want more than we have, and so that is the limit of the resources that are available. Question 36, what do companies compete over? Companies compete over customers and scarce resources. Question 37, what choices do customers make? Well, they make choices about what they're going to buy to meet their needs. They keep those decisions based on how much money do they have and how much they're willing to spend. Question 38, why are monopolies bad for consumers? Well, people have fewer options when there are fewer companies competing, and in order for the free market system to work, customers need to have choices about what they're going to buy and the price they're willing to spend. If there's a monopoly, they don't get to make those choices. Arguments against trust. Critics argued that trust in monopolies reduced competition. Without competition, companies had no reason to keep prices low or to improve their products. It was also hard for new companies to compete with trust. Critics were also upset about the political influence of trust. Some people worried that millionaires were using their wealth to buy favors from elected officials. These critics pointed to government policies that advanced the interests of big business. So question 38, why are monopolies bad for consumers? To continue with that conversation, well, companies have no reason to keep prices low or to improve their products when they have no one to compete with. And it's also hard for new companies to compete with companies that are so ingrained in the system that they have so much money that no new companies can make it in there. 39. What were some of the arguments used by those who were against trust in monopolies? Well, they believed it squeezed out competition. They believed that these new trusts would have no reason to keep prices low or to improve their products. And they were also upset about the political influence that trust had on our government. They were afraid that these trusts were buying the votes of the people running the trust and the government working together, and it was hard to beat that when the government and the trust are working together. Question 40, what criticism do people have about the influence of trust in our politics? Well, they believed that these trusts were using their money and influence to have the government do their bidding for them. Trusts, for example, use their money and influence to persuade Congress to enact protective tariffs or taxes on imported goods. By making imports more expensive, the government encouraged the purchase of American-made goods. At the same time, they protected the trust from foreign competition. John Reagan, a member of Congress from Texas, said, primary source, 1877, "There were no beggars till Vanderbilts shaped the action of Congress and molded the purpose of government. Then the few became fabulously wealthy, the many wretchedly poor." So question 41, what is an example of how the government helped the wealthy corporations? Well, having Congress pass protective tariffs is an example of the government looking out for big business and big business giving government money and looking out for them. Under pressure from the public, the government slowly moved toward controlling giant corporations. Congress approved the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890, which banned the formation of trust and monopolies. However, it was too weak to be effective. Some state governments passed laws to regulate business, but the corporations usually sidestepped them. So question 42. What was the purpose of the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890? Its goal was to ban trust and monopolies. Question 43. Why was the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 not as successful as supporters would have liked? Well, many times the Sherman Antitrust Act wasn't followed. They would maybe pay money to government politicians to look the other way or for police to look the other way. It was really too weak to be very effective. And sometimes corporations found loopholes in the system. They would pay for high-priced lawyers that would find loopholes in the system. Arguments for trust. Naturally, some business leaders defended trust. Imagine that. Andrew Carnegie published articles arguing that too much competition ruined businesses and put people out of work. In an article titled Wealth and Its Uses, he wrote, primary source, Andrew Carnegie, Wealth and Its Uses, "It will be a great mistake for the community to shoot the millionaires, for they are the bees that make the most honey and contribute most to the hive even after they have gorged themselves full." Defenders of big business argued that the growth of giant corporations brought lower production costs, lower prices, higher wages, and a better quality of life for millions of Americans. They pointed out that, by 1900, Americans enjoyed the highest standard of living in the world. So question 44, what were the arguments used by those who supported trust? Those who supported trust would argue that competition sometimes was ineffective, sometimes competition ruined businesses, sometimes it put people out of work. They would also argue that it brought consumers lower prices, it brought the workers higher wages and a better quality of life, and they also used the point that by 1900, America did have the highest standard of living in the world. So they did make some good, compelling cases. Well, thank you very much for watching. Since the term monopoly was used in this video, I thought I'd close with this joke: how every standard game of Monopoly ends. I wonder if you've ever had that happen to you before. Thank you very much for watching and have a nice day.